Welcome to the AskJunior Judgment Podcast. I'm Sarah Johnson, and joining me today is Michael Chen.
Hello, everyone. We're excited to dive into today's topic.
Today, we'll be discussing a landmark case in Indian constitutional law, Maneka Gandhi v. Union of India. This 1978 Supreme Court of India decision had far-reaching implications for personal liberty and due process rights in India.
Absolutely, Sarah. This case really expanded the interpretation of fundamental rights under the Indian Constitution, particularly Article 21, which deals with the right to life and personal liberty. Shall we start by giving some background on how this case came about?
That's a great place to start. In July 1977, Maneka Gandhi, who was a prominent journalist, received a letter from the government informing her that her passport had been impounded in the public interest under Section 10(3) of the Passports Act. When she asked for the reasons, the government refused to provide them, citing public interest again.
And this refusal to provide reasons is what led Gandhi to challenge the government's actions in court, right?
Exactly. She filed a writ petition in the Supreme Court arguing that the government's actions violated her fundamental rights, particularly her right to personal liberty under Article 21 and her freedom of speech and expression under Article 19(1).
This case really forced the Supreme Court to grapple with some big constitutional questions. How did they approach it?
The court had to consider several key issues. First, does the right to travel abroad fall under the personal liberty protected by Article 21? Second, what kind of procedure is required to deprive someone of that liberty? And third, how do Articles 14, 19, and 21 of the Constitution interact with each other?
Those are some weighty constitutional questions. Let's break them down one by one. What did the court say about whether the right to travel abroad is part of personal liberty?
The court took a broad view here. They held that the right to travel abroad is indeed part of the personal liberty protected by Article 21. Justice Bhagwati, in his opinion, emphasized that the Constitution should be interpreted liberally to expand fundamental rights, not restrict them.
That's a really important point. It shows the court taking an expansive view of fundamental rights. What about the procedure required to restrict this liberty?
This is where the court made some groundbreaking pronouncements. They held that the procedure established by law under Article 21 must be right, just, and fair, and not arbitrary or unreasonable. This was a departure from earlier interpretations that simply required a procedure prescribed by enacted law.
So they're saying it's not enough for there to just be a law on the books. That law itself has to meet certain standards of fairness.
Exactly. The court emphasized that the principles of natural justice, like the right to be heard, are implicit in Article 21. They held that Maneka Gandhi should have been given an opportunity to be heard before her passport was impounded.
That's a significant development in due process rights. It seems like the court was really expanding the scope of judicial review over executive actions here.
Absolutely. This decision gave the courts much more power to scrutinize both laws and executive actions that restrict personal liberty. It wasn't just about whether a law existed, but whether that law was fair and reasonable.
I can see how this would have far-reaching implications. Did the court say anything about how different fundamental rights interact with each other?
Yes, this was another crucial aspect of the judgment. The court overruled its earlier decision in A.K. Gopalan v. State of Madras, which had held that Articles 19 and 21 were mutually exclusive.
Can you explain what that means and why it's significant?
Sure. In Gopalan, the court had said that if a law satisfied the requirements of Article 21, procedure established by law, it didn't need to also satisfy the requirements of Article 19, which guarantees various freedoms like speech and expression.
And the Maneka Gandhi case changed that view.
Yes, the court in Maneka Gandhi held that these fundamental rights are not watertight compartments. A law that restricts personal liberty under Article 21 must also pass the test of Article 19 and Article 14, equality before law. This meant a much higher standard for laws restricting fundamental rights.
That's a really important shift in constitutional interpretation. It seems like it would provide much stronger protection for fundamental rights.
Absolutely. It meant that the state couldn't just pass a law with some semblance of procedure and claim it satisfied Article 21. The law would have to be reasonable, non-arbitrary, and respect other fundamental rights as well.
This case really seems to have reshaped Indian constitutional law. How did the court ultimately rule on Maneka Gandhi's specific situation?
Interestingly, the court didn't actually quash the order impounding Gandhi's passport. Instead, based on assurances from the Attorney General that the government would consider any representations made by Gandhi and make a decision within certain time limits, the court disposed of the petition without passing any formal order.
So the immediate practical outcome for Gandhi wasn't necessarily a win, but the constitutional principles laid down had much broader implications.
Exactly. While Gandhi didn't get an immediate victory, the legal principles established in this case had a profound impact on Indian constitutional law. It strengthened due process rights, expanded the scope of personal liberty, and provided a more holistic interpretation of fundamental rights.
It's fascinating how a case about a passport could lead to such significant constitutional developments. Are there any other key points from the judgment we should highlight?
One important aspect we haven't touched on is how the court dealt with the government's claim of public interest in refusing to disclose reasons for impounding the passport.
Oh yes, that's an important point. How did the court approach that issue?
The court was quite critical of the government's stance here. They emphasized that the power to refuse disclosure of reasons should be used sparingly and only in genuine cases where public interest demands it. The court found that in Gandhi's case, there was no justification for withholding the reasons.
That seems like an important check on government power. It prevents the state from using public interest as a blanket justification for secretive actions.
Absolutely. The court stressed the importance of transparency in government actions, especially when fundamental rights are at stake. They also laid down guidelines for how the passport authorities should exercise their powers under the Passports Act.
This case really seems to have touched on so many crucial aspects of constitutional law and civil liberties. How has its impact been felt in subsequent years?
The Maneka Gandhi case has had a lasting impact on Indian jurisprudence. It's been cited in numerous subsequent judgments and has become a cornerstone of Indian constitutional law. Its expansive interpretation of Article 21 has been used to recognize various unenumerated rights as part of the right to life and personal liberty.
Can you give some examples of rights that have been recognized based on this interpretation?
Certainly. Subsequent judgments have used the Maneka Gandhi case to recognize rights such as the right to privacy, the right to a clean environment, the right to education, and even the right to sleep as part of the right to life and personal liberty under Article 21.
That's remarkable. It really shows how a single case can have such a profound and lasting impact on the law and people's rights.
Absolutely. The Maneka Gandhi case is often seen as marking a shift towards a more rights-oriented jurisprudence in India. It empowered the courts to take a more active role in protecting fundamental rights and scrutinizing state actions.
As we wrap up our discussion, what do you think are the key takeaways from this landmark case?
I think there are several important points to remember. First, the case expanded the scope of personal liberty and strengthened due process rights in India. Second, it established that fundamental rights must be interpreted harmoniously, not in isolation. Third, it emphasized the need for fairness and reasonableness in laws and procedures that restrict fundamental rights. And finally, it set the stage for the recognition of various unenumerated rights in subsequent years.
Those are excellent points. This case really demonstrates the evolving nature of constitutional interpretation and how the courts can play a crucial role in safeguarding and expanding civil liberties.
Absolutely, Michael. The Maneka Gandhi case is a perfect example of how constitutional law isn't static, but adapts and evolves to meet the changing needs of society and to provide better protection for individual rights.
Well, that brings us to the end of our discussion on this landmark case. We hope our listeners have gained a deeper understanding of the Maneka Gandhi case and its significance in Indian constitutional law.
Indeed, and we encourage our listeners to explore this topic further. Constitutional rights affect us all, and understanding these key cases helps us appreciate the foundations of our legal system.
Thank you for your insights, and thank you to all our listeners for joining us today on the Ask Junior Judgment Podcast. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep engaging with the law.
Thanks, Sarah, and goodbye, everyone.